Good morning, everybody. Hope you are enjoying Arty Bites this morning, and welcome to our live Q&A panel on textiles and well-being for self, others, and the environment. I will ask the panel just to introduce themselves now quickly. If we can start with Kate Horner.
Hello, Kate Horner from Artybird Carnforth. So looking forward to sharing with you today.
And Helen.
Hello, I'm Helen Melvin of Fiery Felts. I'm a natural dye and felt maker.
And Debbie.
Hi, it's Debbie Tonkeys, and I'm from DT Craft and Design and Making Futures, and I'll be teaching the knitting programs, and I'm also a dyer.
And Trish.
Hi, I'm Trish. I'm a fellowship student with Artybirds, and I also have Norwegian wool and artisan.
And Deirdre.
Hi, I'm Deirdre from All Things Creative in Nottingham, where we deliver courses on upholstery, fashion, pattern cutting and tailoring.
And Elizabeth?
I'm Elizabeth. I'm from Farm Yarn. We're organic farmers and we have fleeces and yarn.
And Kate Ryan.
Hello, I'm Kate Ryan. I'm a tutor at Artybird Carnforth.
And finally, I'm Alison. I am Arty admin. And we've got loads of great questions coming in today. So if everybody's okay, I shall just crack straight on with them. The first questions have come in from Jenny and it's directed at Helen. Jenny has got a lovely clump of goldenrod. Should she use it in full flower or as it goes over, and does it yield different colours? Also, her dyer's broom is flowering. How would I dye with it?
Okay, so first of all, goldenrod. So this is silk dyed in goldenrod. This is dyed in goldenrod flowers. You can use the whole of goldenrod while it's in flower. I think you get a slightly clearer yellow if you just use the flowers, which is why I did the silk. It's a beautiful light fast yellow, and over dyed in indigo, that of course makes the most fantastic emerald greens. So use it now if it's in flower. Don't let it go to seed. And if you want to make it go a bit further, you can chop up the whole flowering top. Julissa tinctoria dyes greenweed. So that is that one, if you can see it. For those of you who don't know, it's slightly more unusual because this is a kind of specialist dye plant. This forms a bush about 4 or 5 foot high and about 3 feet wide. And you use it when it's like this, when it's in flower, and you use the whole flowering top. So you chop it up, push it into soak, leave it to soak for 24 hours, heat to the simmer. And it's a classic method of dyeing with fresh stuff. And you use about 200% waft. So if you've got 100 grams of fibre, you would use 200 grams of fresh dyer's greenweed. This is Julissa tinctoria. And then you mordant your fabric with alum as you would with just a standard alum recipe. If you're dyeing silk like I do now, leave the cream of tartar out of the equation and just mordant with 15% alum. I think that's it. I can't think of anything else.
Thanks, Helen. Has anybody else that would like to add anything onto that, or no? Okay.
So Helen, do you dry your, if you've got left over, do you dry it?
Yes, I do. We've now got a wonderful bit of kit that chops up all our dye plants, and then I have a dehydrator, and it's absolute bliss. So if you've got a large amount of dye plants, it's worth doing. So the first pick of dyer's greenweed, I've got 1 kilo of dried tops from it, and I'm just about to do another cut this weekend, and I'll probably get the same again. So it dries very well and it retains its colour. Goldenrod's an odd one because it loses its colour when it's dried. So this year, for the first time, I'm going to actually try extracting the dye material from the plant, which is why I dyed that, because I wanted something to a comparison. Yes.
Lovely, thanks, Helen. But I think that leads us on to a question from Nicola. Nicola would like to plant a dye garden. She only has a very small space, so approximately 2 square meters, and perhaps some pots. What plants would you suggest are best to plant for such a small space?
Right. So what I'd go for is plants which are very tinctorially strong. So they're giving a lot of colour for a small amount of plant. So Dyer's chamomile, Anthus tinctoria, is great. It's a big yellow daisy-like flower head. You can go on picking it all the way through the summer and drying it, and it gives a really rich golden yellow. The other one is Japanese indigo. Now I've posted, I hope we've posted the link to 2 companies that sell the seeds for this. So this is about 2 meters of silk dyed in the fresh leaves of Japanese indigo. So this is just 2 plants, and they weren't very big plants either. And it grows very, very well in pots. And you have a first cut, and then you may get another 2. So you get the first cut round about now, a little bit earlier for some people. It depends what part of the country you're in. And then you should get another cut at the end of the summer, and then finally one in October. So it's really good value. And I particularly like this fresh leaf technique, which is brilliant. But you can make an indigo vat from it and get the more blue. This is quite a turquoisey blue. If it's difficult, blues are really difficult on screens, is what I'm trying to say. But this is actually a quite turquoisey blue, and it's absolutely fabulous. So the other one, you might, if you've got a tub, you might want to consider madder. Madder grows very well in the tub. And when you come to tip it out after 4 years, you've got all the roots, which is what you use in one place. So that might be worth thinking about. Or something like Coreopsis tinctoria. And in fact, this is Coreopsis, and so is this on organza. And I just love these colours. So this is on a large piece of silk as well, silk organza. And this is the colour that you can get from Coreopsis, tickweed it is. The nice thing about this is you get just as good colour, almost as good colour from the cultivars that you get from garden centres. You don't need the specialist Coreopsis tinctoria dye plant unless you particularly want it. So that'd be another one. And they all grow well in pots. Don't put woad into a pot, and don't put weld into a pot. They don't like it. And I'm just trying to think. I think the other one we tried in the pot was Lady's Bedstraw, but it's a bit more of a technical one, if you like, one someone who's really interested in old dyeing. And again, it's the root. I think I would go for madder. I think you could do madder, Japanese indigo, and Dyer's chamomile quite happily in that space and have fun.
That's lovely. Thanks, Helen. Has anybody else got anything to add to that?
I just wondered, Helen, when you've made up the dye, do you use it quite quickly, or can you keep it in a liquid form?
Which one? Which dye are we talking? This leaf technique with Japanese indigo, yeah. It's fresh, and it doesn't keep. So you use it the day that you make it. The other dye baths you can keep. And there's a lovely book by a lady called Catherine Ellis and Joy Boutrop, which describes the technique of how to extract the dye material from your plant material. So it's another way of keeping it as opposed to drying it. You could think about freezing a liquid, of course, if you've got freezer space. That's another one. Lots of people do that. Or freezing the dye material if you've got freezer space, as opposed to drying.
That's lovely. Thanks. Sorry, a question's actually just come in from Pip. What dye plants are good to have in your garden for bees?
Oh, well, goldenrod is really, actually it's not bees so much, but it's really attracting insects at the moment. The one that the bees are climbing all over at the moment is purple loosestrife. Which is a really tall plant with I'm not good on technical terms, but the long purple flowering tops. It's not producing it doesn't produce a tremendously interesting colour. It's a tannin collector. So you can use it for making a black ink if you wanted to. And you can also use it as a source for tannin. And once you've got it in your garden, you've got it. It will plant itself all around the garden, given half a chance. But almost all the dye plants, particularly, I mean, things like, I have meadowsweet in my garden. All these wild plants really attract all the insects. We made the mistake of planting elecampane, if anyone knows this, it's the wild sunflower, thinking it was a dye plant. That attracts lots of bees. You see huge bumbles on them. I would go for something like, if you're interested in planting for the bees, like the coreopsis. The original Coreopsis tinctoria is a single flower, and the cultivars are all, frilly, big flower heads, and I don't think the insects like those as much. But somebody knows more about that than me, might contradict me. So I would go for the older one, the Coreopsis tinctoria.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much. That's brilliant. Unless anybody's got anything else to add, I shall move on to the next question. Is that okay?
For the bees, it's anything that's a fairly simple flower, so that it's a nice open face for them. Anything complicated, it's more difficult for them to get in.
Lovely. Thanks, Elizabeth. Right, I've got a question on from Claire Nina talking about dyeing, and she's wondering sort of what safety measures does one need to take into account towards oneself and the environment when dyeing by hand? And I guess leading into that is also a question about what mordants are considered safe today. If anybody would like to take that one on. Kate, Ryan, can you help with mordants and things?
Well, there are lots of different mordants that you can use. I've been experimenting lately with the natural mordants, which tend to be high in tannins. So that's things like oak gall and cutch and myrobalan, also pomegranate. And those are natural mordants, so they are natural plants, so they are deemed to be fairly safe to use. The chemical that most people use as a safe mordant is alum. I haven't tried using any of the other chemicals to mordant fabrics with. Perhaps Debbie or Helen might have something to add to that about mordanting with anything else other than the natural mordants or alum. Have you? Does anybody else mordant it with anything?
I used to. When I started, I've been dyeing for getting on for 30 years, I suppose. When I started, we used the full range. So that was tin, stannous chloride, and copper sulfate. And I don't use them now. I use iron and a pH changer like ammonia for almost all my dyeing. You get a terrific range of colours. The absolute no-no is the chrome, potassium dichromate, because that is carcinogenic and teratogenic, which means it can deform fetuses. So like you, the natural sources, you didn't mention staghorn sumac, which is a fantastic source of tannin as well. Sorry, you sound like I'm picking you up on that. Just that's a
no. It's not one I've actually tried to use, but I have a source of a tree. I've recently identified a tree somewhere that I can get hold of, so I'm going to try using it this year.
The nice thing about it is that it doesn't impart much colour to the textiles. Some of it, I mean, oak gall doesn't either, but some of the others do give rather a lot of colour. So it's very high in tannins. And once you've got it, you've got it. Be warned if you push it in your garden. I think it's.
So what kind of percentage would you recommend using staghorn sumac at?
I'm really sorry. I'd have to look it up in my book. One of those ones with figures, and I can't think. What I can do is pop it into the onto the chat or onto the Facebook page.
That would be lovely. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
I've been using modifiers, so after I've dyed them, and using citric acid and soda ash to change the alkalinity, and that's after dyeing, as well as copper and iron as well. So I've been using the modifiers afterwards, but still sort of using the ones Kate's been using, or aluminium acetate, depending on what I've been doing.
I have got some samples, and I'm just thinking I might have to get up and go next door for them if.
Yeah, the rest of that question was about sort of safety things to take into account. I would recommend whatever you're dyeing with always to wear, protective clothing on your hands, because if it's going to dye fabric, it's probably likely to dye your skin as well. So that's definitely something that I would recommend. And if you're dealing with things in powder, you should wear a face mask that's going to stop the powder getting into your lungs.
Yeah.
And obviously to be very safety conscious, we're often dealing with hot liquids. So to be aware of hot liquids and trailing wires, if you've got, hot plates and things that you're heating big dye vats up with, and that's something just to be aware of. But those are the main concerns I would reckon as far as safety of the person is concerned.
I think also there's a lot of people dye in the kitchen because they don't have a dedicated dye space, so that's where food is. So it's to make sure that you separate the dye utensils and equipment from the food utensils and equipment, and covering the fruit bowl, put a cloth over them or something like that, because it's just really being aware that you don't want this stuff inside of you, and making sure, because the powder particularly can fly, so maybe to have some kitchen towel or newspaper down so it just absorbs it when it settles, and of course don't let your cat jump on the worktop and things like that, because they're likely, you're there and they come and look at you and it's kind of like, no. So it's just about keeping everybody safe. Anything else?
I think, yeah, I use slow cookers, and if you're dyeing in the kitchen, actually a slow cooker is a really good idea, and you can, this is a good time of the year to buy them actually. You often get them sort of discounted and what have you, and you can mordant in a slow cooker one day and then dye in it the next, so you can do quite a lot of dyeing with just one slow cooker in the kitchen, and that doesn't take up much space.
Yeah, I've had great success with slow cookers, but I've had success and fun this summer dyeing with Debbie's natural extracts, which are in powder form, but that makes it a lot easier. And although I've done dyeing from my garden in the past, these are a very consistent and lovely depth of colour. So I'm using 4% strength and using things like pomegranate and coreopsis. So I love the garden dyes, but I think you can also have a lot of fun with the natural extracts, and it is all the safety precautions, but they're very, very easy to use. They're great fun, but it's when, this summer I must have had 12 different colors and I used 4 different modifiers. So I ended up with copper and iron and whatever, and they were all fluttering on the line in the bright sun. And it was just a delight. I think dyeing cloth, your own cloth, is amazing. So there's your wonderful techniques, Helen, but there's also, for us beginners, there's Debbie, who we can buy these wonderful extracts which are sustainable, and they're actually natural extracts, which is great.
Lovely, thanks Trish. I've actually got that actually ties into another question I've both received from Pip, which is, can you get a full rainbow from using natural dyes instead of synthetic? Debbie, can you start that one off?
Yeah, sure. Yes, in short, you can. It depends what you're working with, but if you're working with something like wool, you can use I tend to use weld or goldenrod for yellows, then I'll be using madder for the reds, blending the goldenrod or the weld with the madder, that will give you your orange. Then I tend to use lac or cochineal for the pinky kind of purple colours, but I'll mix that with either Saxon blue, or if I've got some indigo, I'll do an over dye to get purple, really deep purples, and to get the blue. So yeah, you can get a full range, and they can be soft and subtle, or they can be bright and vibrant. I think people tend, the question we often get asked at shows, and I'm sure Helen would share the same views, that does it all have to be pale, wishy-washy colours? Now, sometimes I like pale colours, but people often do want bright colours too. So yeah, no, it's perfectly possible.
Brilliant. Thanks. Anybody would like to add anything else to that?
If anyone can, see.
Yeah. Can I show you my basket? Can you see it? Sorry, Elizabeth, were you about to say something?
I was just about to say, in the back of my picture, all of the wools in the back, that's our Romney wool. It's all been dyed with natural colours, and really we've got the full rainbow.
Lovely, thanks.
Can I say something about synthetic dyes? Because it was quite a general question about synthetic. And I think one of the things that we've been doing a lot of work, Kate and myself, is looking at how to use synthetic dyes and exhausting the dye bath so that you're not throwing anything away. So I think that's something that is really important to look at, taking control of your colours, not just throwing them all in, and but actually looking at the quantities that you're using so that you're not damaging the environment by having a lot of colour to get rid of.
Well, I know one of the things that I find on my workshops is that we do exactly that. We work with different concentrations, the idea being that you work out the optimum amount of dye you need to get the colour that you're looking for. So that, like you say, you're not throwing anything away. I mean, you can always reuse it as an exhaust afterwards, but ideally you want to match that, get that sort of happy balance of dye to fixing to colour. And generally speaking, what you find is that students will go full on and tip loads of dye in, and then by the end of the session they're getting it just about right, and that's that's what we're aiming for, really.
Brilliant. Thanks, thanks, ladies. Staying with the environment, though, I've had some questions about sort of like textiles in the environment. So a couple of questions. One has come in from Bessie, who is saying that she's watching the Great British Sewing Bee this year. They gave out an incredible statistic, which is there are 6 generations of clothing existing on the planet. How should we respond to this? Deirdre, can I ask you to start on that one, please?
Yes, I think at the moment there's a real movement, probably more of a mainstream movement, looking at sustainability in fashion and textiles, and also the ethical issues around textiles and fast fashion. And I think that's become much more of the moment. There's all sorts of things happened recently which have highlighted that. Working with younger students at college, I've noticed a lot of them are in, they're into Extinction Rebellion, they're into all of that sort of thing. They're really concerned about the environment. Sometimes they don't think it through, so they'll be going, I'm going on this march, but I'll just nip into Primark and buy myself a new t-shirt. So, they need to sort of maybe think about the ethics behind fast fashion and fast clothing. But I think there is really a really big movement at the moment that's beginning to start about where we are looking at valuing our clothing more and not just throwing it out. And I noticed even the other day on the television, there was an advert for a detergent company, and they're talking about, washing your clothes better, thinking about how you care for them so they last longer. So even there getting this sort of idea. And the other day there was pictures of Princess Beatrice in her wedding, and she'd worn the Queen's dress from the 1950s. She put little organza sleeves on it, which sort of brought it up to date and made it more thing. And I thought how refreshing that was. She hadn't gone away and spent tens of thousands of pounds on a couture gown to be worn once. This idea that it's okay to take something from the past and to value the clothing, especially clothing like that. Why should it not be worn again? And I think it's about persuading people to wear their clothes more, buy better, make them last longer, and then recycle them and reuse them. And I think that's really important. And there's also, you know, it's just your imagination, recycling your clothing, making it do something else, making it into something else, and it be, you know, really easy to do. And I think it's quite a challenging thing to do as well. You can re-dye them, you can print on them, you know, you can restyle them, you can do all sorts of things, and encouraging people to do that, I think, is important. And also at the studio, because we do upholstery as well, upholstery is recycling. But, you know, when you reupholster something, you're just recycling it. You're just creating something new. So instead of going away and getting new dining room chairs, you recover them. Or you've got an armchair, you strip it all down, you put new springs in it, you reupholster it, and you've got something that's going to last you another 100 years. You know, you're not throwing all this stuff out and just getting new. You're treasuring what you've got. It's a bit like repair shop, really, I think.
Lovely.
Longer projects, but you know, yeah.
Thanks, Deirdre. Have you got anything to add to that, Kate? Ryan?
Yeah, I would just add that on our dressmaking class, the course program that we've had this year, and there've been a couple of students, one in particular, who spent almost the whole year looking at reusing old garments and making them into something new. And she's made a lot of clothes for her son, her 6-year-old son, and kitted him out with lots of lovely sweatshirts and trousers made from her husband's old t-shirts. And she's added in a applique to them. She got him to do some drawings and then do a applique. There were drawings of his rabbits. And so she made those drawings into a applique for the front of his own t-shirts. So she was using craft skills, but with repurposing fabrics and reusing fabrics all the time. So that's something that comes into our dressmaking program. And we really look at that as being a way of, definitely, there's so much fabric out there. And we all have, I mean, I know that I have a very big fabric stash of fabric that I've collected from all over the place. Most of it I haven't bought, or I've bought in charity shops, but I've just fabric that I couldn't bear to throw away, but I now need to make it into something. And that's something that I'm doing at the moment, as I'm making new garments out of old fabric. And I think that's something that it's something that we could all look at rather than buying new.
Lovely. Thank you.
You're also really good, Kate, at repairing and, you know,
Yeah.
and creating patches or things to repair and darning and the way you stitch. I think it's beautiful what you do when you do that.
Yes, and over dye things as well. I'm wearing a shirt that got over dyed in indigo. It had gone it had gone dirty beige, so it ended up in indigo, of course. So
Everything ends up in indigo, everything.
It's true, people. There's always an indigo dye that going on at Artybird Carnforth. Sorry, if I could.
The blue carpet.
Just relating to textiles and things on the environment. Another question from Pip, which is, what fibres are best for the environment when you're looking at yarn for projects? Who would like to take the lead on that one?
I might start on that. It's quite a complicated question. I think most people have seen in the news, and I'm sure there are at least a couple of people on this call who could say a lot about wool and the wool industry in the UK. And wool, I think, as a fibre has got so much potential, and you know, has got a lot of it's underused in the UK, I think. When it comes to plant fibres, there's quite a difference of opinion. Cotton, for example, very, very sort of good to wear and it's natural, but it can be quite intensive to grow. So it's about looking at the life cycle of the plant or whatever you're producing as a textile, not just what it's made from, but how much does it cost in the environmental terms to actually grow it. You know, cotton's very water hungry, for example. Plants like hemp, on the other hand, put back nitrogens into the soil, so they've got arguably a better life cycle. Bamboo and tencel, people have got very kind of polarized views, I think, on those, and the plant grows very quickly with bamboo, but again, it's how it's processed. But I'll pass over to someone else on wool, because I'm sure there are people who can give a much better picture on wool than I can.
Yeah, sorry, I could just sort of like interject there, because you mentioned there about the bottom falling out of the wool market, and that was another question that we had in about, you know, why should we continue to grow and use wool in this country? Elizabeth, could you give us some insight into that?
I think it's an understanding of it, isn't it? Wool is such a natural product. I think there's a misunderstanding that the sheep have to be harmed to gather the wool, which isn't correct. It's like them having a haircut. And our Romney sheep actually are very productive when it comes to growing wool. So we actually have to clip them twice a year for them to be comfortable, which is great for us. I think it's also understanding, you know, the distances that clothing has to travel, the people behind making the garments and things. It is such a broad understanding. From the wool point of view, we can produce it. It is such a variable thing. It's fire retardant for upholstery and things like that. It doesn't take fire. It's just understanding the product. And then at the end of the day, you can throw it in your garden and it's going to put back into the garden for growing plants and things. It's an unbelievable product.
Okay, would you like to add to that? I can see you.
I love wool. I think wool is an amazing fibre. It can hold 20% of its weight in moisture before it feels wet. And my dad remembers being in the army and wearing his great coat when he was out all night on sentry duty, and his coat would be dry and he never got wet, although his coat was absolutely saturated by the end of duty. But it's an incredible fibre. And the reason why this is amazing is that those water molecules are vibrating. And as they vibrate, they create heat. And that heat that it's generating is really important in terms of health, because we have two sets of sensors. One is the pain sensors and the other is the heat sensor. And the heat nerves actually travel faster than the pain nerve system. So you can mask pain with heat. And that's why, you know, we put a hot water bottle on us or a cold compress on us when we get hurt. So I've made gloves for my friend who's got rheumatoid arthritis, and they're fingerless gloves. And if it's bad, she can wear them in the classroom and she can teach and she can do everything she wants, but she's more comfortable from wearing these because they're keeping the pain away. And I know in Russia, they have explored wool bandages and things to be able to give pain relief for these sort of chronic pain illnesses. And one of our ex-students, Claire Ashton, she has explored necks and scarves and things for people to wear who have neck and upper back pain, again, just to keep them comfortable, because if you don't scrunch up with pain, then there's less pain. So if you can relax with it, and wool will allow you to do that. And it's just an amazing fibre. And another one I want to mention is linen, which was our natural plant fibre, and we stopped growing it when cotton came in. And you know, seeds have been eliminated by growing cotton, and you know, whole communities have died because their fishing industry and things have gone, and it's just a dust bowl because the water's being used to grow cotton. But linen is our local one, and I know locally at the local paper mill, they've been regrowing linen to process and to try and bring it back in. So yes, looking at ramie, looking at hemp, looking at linen, looking at these other natural plant fibres really, really important because they're gorgeous, they're delicious to wear. Knitted linen, there's a lot of knitted linen jersey out there now, and it's so comfortable to wear. It's beautiful. So I think we need to look at those. And I also think we need to realize that the synthetic fibers, the acrylics, the nylons, the polyesters, they're plastic. And people don't realize they're coming from oil. They are plastic. They are going to be on this planet forever. And an acrylic's got no heat in it whatsoever. And people buying acrylic jumpers to wear in winter thinking they're going to be warm. You won't. Buy wool.
I just
Lovely.
I read a wonderful book.
Sorry, I was just going to say wool is absolutely bliss to dye with natural dyes. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay, Helen.
Thank you.
I read a fantastic book this summer by Cassia St. Clair, and it's called The Golden Thread, and it actually gives you the history of all these fibers. And one of the most fascinating facts was that they have researched and found archaeological samples of wool that the Vikings were actually making their longboat sails out of wool because they were waterproof, and all the comments about how they're sustainable, but they're easy to use. They can be used again. They don't deteriorate, but when they do it in a very safe way, and they use them again and again. So they're a sail, and then they're a tent, and then they're on the land, and they're covering people. But it's a fantastic book because it goes through linen, the history of linen across the world. And it really is, I feel, fascinating to find out when we are working as creatives with these different cloths and fibers, the depth of history around how people have used them and the stories they tell over the generations and the civilizations. So it is a very good read.
Thanks, Trish. Unless we've got anything to add, I'll move on to the next question, if that's all right. Right, next questions have come in from Libby. We've talked a lot about the environment, but we're not talking about sort of like well-being. And she's heard a lot about slow stitch and mindful stitching, but she's not sure what it is. And has there been much research about this for health and well-being? Trish, can you start us off on that one, please?
Yeah, this is something I'm quite passionate about because I also practice as a qualified coach for well-being, as well as working in organisations. And there is lots of research about the benefits of slow stitch. I think it was in 2012, somebody in the States, Elaine Lipson, started the Slow Stitch Manifesto. And it's not about just slowing down, it's about balance, it's about taking that time, it's about being part of the moment when you're stitching. And then Claire Wellesley Smith picked it up and wrote a lovely book, Slow Stitch. But it is about, and there has been research about well-being and health, it's the slowing down, and it's that flow, and it's being in the moment. And there has been research that concentrating and that rhythmical stitching over a period of time lowers blood pressure, it calms you, and I actually use it with groups. But this wasn't just started in 2012. People have been stitching slowly for generations and through civilizations, and it has been mainly women. And this comes in as part of the community as well, because women who were doing utilitarian stitch, either cantha stitch or whole cloth in Durham and Wales, all across the world, would often sit with each other as a community within their groups. And they would talk and they would chat about what was going on in that moment in their lives. And that was where they sorted a lot of problems out, household problems, whatever. But it's also that sense of collaboration and community that brings well-being, that you're not alone in this. Stitching on your own is absolutely wonderful because that again is about being in the moment. So yes, I think it's incredibly important because I love hand stitching. And I think it is important for well-being. I think it is important for communities. There's a community in Lancaster of refugees from Syria who do not speak any English, but they've set up a slow stitch, hand stitch group, and they come together, and this is very, very powerful for these people, these women who can share their stitch and their techniques. And I think that's very, very powerful today with everything that's going on in our world and with this pandemic. So yes, I think there's huge research that this is a very powerful way of keeping ourselves well. Any creative endeavour, but slow stitch and mindful
Thanks,
stitch.
Trish. And Kate, what would you like to add?
I'd like to talk about the intelligence of the hands, because a lot of people think of intelligence being the head, but we have an intelligence with our hands that all of us here have, and all of you who are watching have, and it is a need to be making and creating and using, and I want to extend the slow stitch into slow weaving, slow knitting, slow felting, that joy of taking the fiber and spinning the yarn and making the cloth and turning it into a garment or into upholstery, and having those things around us and to treasure them in our homes and to give them as gifts. It's just phenomenal. And I think it just connects us, connects me to myself. You know, I wove for half an hour before I came here this morning just to calm myself and be there. And if I don't do something with my hands every day, then I don't sleep well.
Right. So how would someone learn more about learning to slow stitch? Are there groups or classes? Can we perhaps put together a list to pop onto the post on this that we could promote for people?
There are groups and classes,
Mhm.
but I think the first thing, as Kate says, it's connecting with yourself as well. And I did a group, and the first thing I asked was, who taught you to sew? Where did you learn to stitch? And it just comes back with that memory to hold a piece of cloth and a needle. It's amazing how just taking that stitch for a line, for a journey, for across the cloth, it's a wonderful thing to try on your own at first, and then you get together with a group. I know several groups where it started off where they chat, or they're part of a WI, or they're part of a craft group. But I think just having that time on your own to, as you remember what you did with the needle and the thread. But yes, I think if there's lots of craft groups that if you just mention it, somebody will start a group, start a conversation with stitch and cloth.
Okay, that's lovely. Moving on from sort of stitching, I've actually had some questions about knitting. And these have come from Pip and Alexander. Thank you both for your questions. The questions are, as someone who knows nothing about knitting, how easy is it to pick up as an adult? What kind of project would you recommend for a beginner? And also there's a question regarding, do you prefer English knitting or continental knitting? I'll leave that over to you, Debbie.
Thank you. I think my experience from my classes, and I also teach art for health and well-being, and the one thing I think we do very much as an adult is that we forget how hard it was to learn things when we were a child, and we expect a lot of ourselves. People put themselves under a huge amount of pressure to get it right first time. So I think the first step is a little bit like Trish was saying. It's about sort of take a step back and remember what it was like learning things when you were a child, and be easy on yourself. You know, give yourself time. Take that kind of time out to kind of learn again how to learn. And it's perfectly possible to learn as an adult. I think it's just about not kind of being too like challenging on yourself and taking a bit of a moment. And it's a brilliant thing to do. It's low kind of cost entry, like stitch. It's something that you can pick it up anywhere. You can you know, you can get into it really quickly, and you know, it's a good mindful, like relaxing hobby and project to get into. As for continental versus kind of the more traditional knitting that probably most of us that in this group, I would imagine, started with, the sort of what I'm going to call UK knitting, so I hope I don't offend anybody. But I use both. when I'm doing colour work, I'll actually have one yarn in each hand. So I'll be doing a combination, and that way I don't end up with that horrible tangly mess that you get when you're doing normal colour work. Sometimes I prefer to knit continental just to give my hands a break. I don't tend to do it in the same project because your tension is usually slightly different whether you knit with your right hand or with your yarn in the left, other than for colour work. But I think it's horses for courses, whatever feels comfortable. If you know, I always tell my students that there is no right or wrong way to hold needles, to hold yarn. It's about do what you feel comfortable with, and if you've produced a fabric that you like at the end, however you got there, whether you're a thrower, a picker, a left-hander, a right-hander, doesn't matter. Just produce fabric, knit.
And basically though, for a novice knitter like myself, who can barely cast on, my grandmother would be spinning, bless her. You will cover that. Will you cover that kind of basic level of knowledge in your introductory program? Will you take people right from the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. The introductory program assumes you've never picked up a pair of knitting needles, and there are videos, there are illustrated handouts for people who prefer to have something in front of them. You can use it on a tablet, you can use it on the computer, or you can have them as printed versions. So because everybody learns differently as well. And we'll be putting some Zoom calls in there so that people can so that I can see people as they knit, because that's really useful to be able to, you know, guide people. So the idea is very much that you can come to that course, that program, having done, you know, having wanted to knit, but never having given it a try at all.
Brilliant, thank you. Has anybody else got anything to add to that? Before, no, all right then. I've got one last question on sort of well-being, and it's, can anybody recommend any particular physical exercises for people who sit in front of a loom or spinning wheel or other piece of equipment for hours? That question's coming from Claire Nina. Claire Nina, thank you. Kate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a trained anything, but what I do myself, and we were kind of throwing this around earlier, and what everybody was doing, get up regularly. Remember to get up, walk round. Somebody said hourly, somebody said every 20 minutes, but you know, just to get up and walk around. But most of what we do, we tend to hunch over. So I find at the end of the day, I do a lot of shoulder rolls, taking my shoulders back, and I do it with my hands on my shoulder. I do it without my hands on my shoulder, and I do it with wide hands like that. And what I find is that then I get different muscle groups, but I sort of do it until I stop clicking. And that's one of the things I do. The other thing I do, because quite often my hands are closed, is to just run and stretch the fingers out, and I take it from there up. Sometimes I take it from there up, and I just re-stretch out to make sure that I don't get them, the memory of them just in that way. But that's just things I do to make myself comfortable. I don't know if anybody else has got anything to add.
Anybody got any top tips?
Well, I think one of them, if you're using a sewing machine, there is that thing about getting up and moving, but I think you have to remember that when you're sitting at a sewing machine, that you're sitting correctly at the sewing machine, that it's the right height, it's the right distance away, it's all that sort of thing as well. It's not just the moving about, it's making sure when you're sitting, when you're working, that you're doing that correctly, and that you've got your feet properly on the floor, and because that will, you know, if it's wrong, that will cause you no end of problems, and you just need to take the time to make sure that you've got everything set up so that you're not injuring yourself while you're working.
I'd second that.
Yeah, thank you, ladies. And on to, I've got two questions left. One is, you know, many people obviously through lockdown have been forced to work at home, and a lot of people are quite happy making at home. Why would you say a community is important to them? And I'll Who can I pick on? Kate Horner, you can start that one.
It's the social aspect, it's the sharing, it's the chatting that Trish was talking about. It's that coming together and not feeling isolated. And I know Helen Melvin, I don't know how you had this insight when lockdown began. Almost the first thing you did was to set up the Facebook group, Creating in the Teeth of Corona. And you brought together nearly 1,000 creatives across the world. And we've never felt isolated in all of this. And I think to share, to bounce ideas, to get feedback, praise, we're not meant to be in isolation. Although we're happy to do the making, I think we need to stay connected, and it's just really, really important.
I would agree with that. Yes, I think it's also the sharing of ideas. I think it takes you out of being on your own and becoming quite intensive about working on your own. But when you're working within a group, and that's what we find in fellowship, that's what we find on all the Artybird courses, it's the collaboration, it's the sharing of ideas, but it's the chat, it's the fun part of it that actually sustains you. So you're still stitching, you're still knitting, you're still weaving, you're still sewing, but it's part of being that group. And I do think that's important. And I think we've managed to do that very, very well on Zoom through Artybird, which is quite incredible.
Creating in the Teeth of Corona, we have a Zoom meeting now once a fortnight, and that's been a lovely add-on to the Facebook group. But it has been fantastic getting that level of community feeling through a page, and people have been posting things that they're making in progress. And other people pop in with comments and suggestions, so it's been very much like a face-to-face. It's been lovely. Kate said I had this wonderful insight. I had no idea. I thought about 20 people would join me in sharing a bit of creativity, and it just sort of exploded. It shows what need there is. So it's a lovely group. Welcome to come and join it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen. Elizabeth?
Speaking as a student that's been through Artybird, I think you can learn a lot from at home and by yourself, and there's some wonderful courses and things that you can follow online. But I think sometimes when you're being creative, I think it's a very touchy-feely thing, and to go and touch someone else's creativity and to feel the structures that have been formed, as well as learning the actual through the course and the tutors, it's learning and looking at other people's techniques. And some people come from completely different backgrounds, not necessarily to do with art, and their background and inspiration suddenly brings something entirely new that no one's ever thought of. Yeah. And it can be shared in a group experience, and I think that is invaluable.
Lovely, thank you. Before I move on to the last question, I've just got we've had a couple of comments from people. Tricia says, here, buy wool. Definitely, Tricia. And Joanne says, the only nicer thing than wearing real wool clothing is wearing real wool clothing that you've had a hand in making. Yeah. I think it's safe to say, Joanne, we couldn't agree more. And Jenny, thank you so much. Jenny says, a very interesting and informative session, and thank you. Well, thank you for staying with us, Jenny. We really appreciate it. And now for our final question. If you've been following us this week in our fellowship and endeavours on Facebook, I have a question about what is Count Poker Down, Kate Horner?
Count Poker Down is a game that I invented for the fellowship group, and Alison photographed me playing it. So what I thought I would do is I'm going to deal a hand of Count Poker Down, and you can join the Facebook group Arty Nest, and I thought that for a month you could have the challenge of a hand of Count Poker Down and post what you do and create using these cards. So Count poker down. Okay, so as in true countdown tradition, we have the sets of cards. We have the contrast cards. So that's something versus something. We have the word cards. So that's just a single word. And we have the similarity cards. All right. So that's something and something. So the rules are you have 5 cards. You have to take one, at least one from each pile. And then this is where the poker comes in. You can stick or twist. You can twist up to 2 cards. Okay, this is count poker down. Who would like to guide me through this deal that's on behalf of the whole of the Artybird community to get us through the summer?
I have broad shoulders. I take full responsibility.
So, Alison, one from each pile, plus which 2?
I'll have one from each pile, and one extra from the right and one extra from the left. Because I haven't got top row or middle from countdown. top row or bottom.
Okay, so we have 2 contrasts, 1 word, and 2 similarities. So we've got scribble versus controlled. We have got dense versus sparse. We have got gap. We have got mark and calligraphy. And we have got soft and wash. Are you sticking or are you twisting? You can twist up to 2.
I'll stick.
We will post those onto our Arty Nest, and I look forward to seeing what you do, taking those words and using them within your work to push, to extend, to question how you actually approach your artwork, your textile work. DT's had a set this morning. He's got to make a video. Yeah, I look forward to seeing what we do with our hand of count poker down.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, ladies, for joining us. I hope everybody watching has enjoyed that session. Thanks again for joining us for Arty Bites. Don't forget to check out all of the courses from All Things Creative and Debbie Tomkeys, and you can check out the products from Helen Melvin and Debbie and Trish and Elizabeth on all their Facebook and website pages. I will post all the links up onto the Facebook pages as soon as possible. Thanks, Deirdre. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Debbie, Helen, Elizabeth, and Trish. And thanks, Eric. Thanks all for watching. Take care. See you soon.
Well, thank you, Alison, as well.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank you
Alison.
very much. Thank you, Kate. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.